allegiance. And Commander Diaz, would you lead us in the pledge?
My honor. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
You may be seated. Okay. Well, under communications, we're going to go ahead and deviate from presentations right now and go straight to reports. And we're going to start with A, audit review of the current audit report on our finances.
All right, is this on? All right, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Council, for having me here today. I'm here. My name is Dennis Osach. I'm with the firm Clifton Larson Allen. And I just want to present the results of the June 30th, 2017 audit that we performed for the City of Nogales. We issued our reports January 23rd, 2018. According to your bond requirements, those do need to be issued by February 1st, so those requirements were met. You probably have a whole stack of papers there that I'm sure that you spent hours going through, but I'm gonna go through briefly some of the reports that you do have in front of you. The first one is really just like a 5-page report that looks like this on our letterhead, and that really just describes what I'm about to do here today. And that's just really just talk about the audit, talk about whether there was any type of material audit adjustments, any past adjustments that we had, what our responsibilities were, any significant estimates in the financial statements, things that would be important just to disclose to governance. So that's what I'm here to do today. The other reports that you have, you should have the single audit report, the annual expenditure limitation report. We did issue a management letter, and then the HERF compliance report. So the HERF compliance report is just a 1-page report. What we do is we report on compliance related to the use of highway user revenue funds. And so we issued a clean opinion on the use of those highway user revenue funds. And so what we do to do that is we test a sample of accounts payable and payroll disbursements to determine that those funds were used in accordance with Arizona revised statutes. The annual expenditure limitation report, and I see you guys have up on here, you're going to be talking about your home rule adoption. And so as part of this, the audit, the state requires that cities and towns issue an annual expenditure limitation report. And so cities and towns either have a home rule adoption or they go with the economic estimates dollar amount that is provided. And what that is that's the expenditure limit of the town. So for all funds combined, you're not allowed to exceed that expenditure limitation amount, whether it's a home rule adoption or whether it's the Economic Estimates Commission, which is usually a lower number than a home rule. And so the town did comply with that. They were within that amount. You'll see in there that there's 3 different schedules that basically reconcile the expenditures that are reported on the annual expenditure limitation report. Ultimately, what that report's doing is, one, it's getting down to more of an economic resources use of funds. So that would be current use of funds versus long-term. And it's also included in there, the state allows for certain exclusions. Certain items are exempt from the expenditure limitation. And so that reconciliation is just reconciling back to all the expenditures that are subject to your expenditure limitation amount. So we issued a clean opinion on that report as well. We did issue a management letter. Basically, in that management letter, there was just a couple of items that we noted. One was just the capital assets. City.
Where's the management?
Oh, I'm sorry. It's a 2-page report. Looks like this. I know you've got a whole stack of them. That would be the HERF report that you've got right there.
I think that was on another file. This one?
That would be the governance communication.
Well, come over here and show. That's a big packet.
Yeah, that's a packet.
That was a big packet.
Yeah.
This is the big packet. Oh, you got. I got the whole packet.
Yeah, that one may not be in there, and the reason is because it is a management letter, and so let me go through. When we do our audit, we have control deficiencies that we'll report, and depending on the level of how we feel it needs to be reported, it'll either be reported in a management letter, it'll be reported as a significant deficiency or a material weakness. What you'll see is the material weaknesses and the significant deficiencies. basically, material weakness is a finding or recommendation that we had where it either resulted in a material misstatement in the financial statements, or we felt that the control was such that we felt like it could potentially cause a material misstatement in the future. A significant deficiency would be an item where it's less severe than material weakness, but we feel it's important enough to bring to the attention of governance, to council. And then a management letter generally just goes to management, but I just wanted to go over a couple of the management comments we did provide to management. One was just the capital assets, and the city has a capital asset policy, and it has within that policy, what the depreciable lives of assets should be. But our recommendation on that policy is that the useful lives assigned to assets shouldn't be so strict to the policy, as there should be some judgment within there based on how long the town or the city truly expects to use those assets. So the policy may say that a vehicle has a useful life of 8 years. We're basically recommending that there should be some range that's in there, whether it's 5 to 15 years, because you may have an asset that you actually use for 15 years, and so you'd want to depreciate that over a 15-year life versus an 8-year life. So that was the recommendation there. The other one was more a recommendation to update the procurement policy. This isn't a finding, it's just a recommendation because with the new uniform grant guidance, they provided basically a 2-year grace period. And within the new uniform grant guidance, they have specific procurement rules that you have to follow on federal funds. And the thresholds are significantly lower than what you've probably seen in the past. They have what they call micro purchases, and these are items that are anywhere between like $3,000 and $5,000. And they have certain rules on how you go about procuring that. The other thresholds, what the city has as their procurement policy are they meet the guidance in the uniform grant guidance, but there are certain things in there, including conflict of interest and other items that we're recommending that the city looks at in order to update the procurement policy. And what we found is that most cities and towns, the procurement policy for uniform grant guidance is only specific to the use of federal funds, but most cities and towns, what they're doing is they're actually adopting a procurement policy and utilizing that, for all purchases versus just for federal funds, because oftentimes you may be making a purchase, and at some point you may be using federal funds, and so those funds, when you use federal funds, would be subject to the new uniform grant guidance procurement rules. So those were some of the management comments that we made. The single audit report, this one is where we basically give an opinion on the use of federal funds. And so in doing that, we determine what the major federal funds are, or federal programs are. And for the fiscal year 2017, there was 2 major federal programs that we looked at. One was the Water Smart Grant, and the other one was the Homeland Security Grant. And so within that packet, what you'll see is there's 2 reports in there. One is compliance with uniform grant guidance, and the second report is a report in accordance with government auditing standards. The government auditing standards report we don't give an opinion on, but rather what we do is we report on internal controls. So if we had a significant deficiency or material weakness, those would be reported related to the financial statements in that report. And then the second report, the Uniform Grant Guidance Report, we do give an opinion. We give an opinion on compliance with your federal programs, and then we just report on internal controls. So if we had any type of significant deficiencies or material weaknesses related to your federal grants that we tested, we'd report those as well. So on compliance, for those 2 federal programs that we looked at, we did issue a clean opinion, so an unmodified opinion. But if you look at page 6, you'll see a summary result of the items related to that. And so you'll see that related to the financial statement, we did have some material weaknesses and significant deficiencies that we did report. And then we had some significant deficiencies that we also reported as part of the federal programs as well. And those items are detailed on pages 7 through, I believe, 12. On 7 through 12. So those would be the reported material weaknesses and significant deficiencies.
So, Mayor, would you please explain page 12? Why is it that we're missing equipment here? Well, you
say here, for 2 of the 10 equipment purchases tested, the location identified on the department's equipment that did not correspond. How can that be happening?
So in this case, it's not that the equipment's missing. We were able to identify and find the equipment, but the listing had a different location listed on it. And so the capital asset listing is not getting updated. So if that equipment changed locations, the capital asset listing should be updated accordingly as well. And that way, you don't have to go searching for those assets, and you can identify those assets.
So how do you do that? How are you going to make sure that this doesn't happen again?
We'll do a physical inventory at the end of the year of this equipment to make sure that it is where we're reporting it.
And not only that, the other thing that should be done is that there should be some education at the the departmental levels as well, so that they're aware if they're either moving that equipment or if they're receiving equipment. Either way, it should probably be reported back to finance so that they can update the listing and not wait till the end of the year to do an inventory to identify it's not in the location where it was identified on the capital asset listing.
Well, there's still some things. I don't know how you give a clean thing when you're saying here that we asked for a reimbursement from the federal government for $4,141 and they denied the reimbursement of the expenditure.
So on that one, we did give a clean opinion. Number one, that dollar amount is well below materiality net level related to that federal program. But the second thing is that what we're reporting here is not that it's a compliance issue, but it's a control issue. Ultimately, the federal government rejected that 4141 that was requested, but the internal control didn't catch it. So the internal control should have caught that the 4141 shouldn't have been claimed and shouldn't have been reported. Ultimately, it was never paid by the federal government, so there wasn't a compliance issue, but it is a control issue in that it was originally submitted and then ultimately rejected.
So does that support what you're saying on page 10, that the city has not established internal controls to ensure capital assets? Because that's, I mean, we've been in business so long, I don't know how we could not have established internal controls.
Well, with that's actually a different item. So this one's specific to capital assets.
But we still lack internal controls.
Yeah, and the reason that we say that is because as part of the audit, we did have some audit adjustments that we had to propose in order to properly state the capital assets. So, with that said, I mean, there are design controls, but there obviously had to be a lapse of control in order for those items to not have, made it to the capital asset listing, or that required some adjustments to the capital asset listing.
You lose control, those internal controls, and things grow legs and they walk away from City Hall.
Yeah, and this isn't a matter of things not necessarily reported. I think that this is more of an issue where it just didn't get capitalized within the general ledger. And so, for example, if it was in an enterprise fund, it would have been expensed rather than capitalized in the period that we identified it.
So, if I understand correctly, is there an amount that separates from compliance to...
No, there's no dollar amount that separates compliance from internal controls.
But like the councilman said when the question of 4,000, like that wasn't a big number or something, and it fell more one way than the other.
Right.
So
it would have been a compliance issue if the city had ultimately got reimbursed for it from the federal government, because that means that the city got reimbursed for expenses that weren't allowable. And so there was no compliance issue because the federal government ultimately rejected it. They identified it versus the city should have identified it before it was submitted, if that makes sense. Well, I guess the point that I was making as far as the dollar threshold, when we look at compliance and whether we can give an opinion on compliance or not, there is a materiality threshold that we have as part of that. So, in looking at that, even if $4,000 was reimbursed in error, we would report a compliance finding, which we didn't this time because it got rejected. We'd report a compliance finding, but $4,000 wouldn't really raise to the level of being, out of compliance to a point where we would have to have a qualified opinion. If it was a $100,000 out of a $400,000 grant, now that would be a non-compliance matter that would be reported and ultimately would result in a qualified opinion. Does that make sense? And that's sort of how the dollar threshold comes into play.
Well, your technical talk doesn't always make sense. We're trying to go little by little here.
Yep.
I'm just worried about this lack of internal controls.
Yep, and that's why we report it to council, is for that reason. It's good that you're concerned about it, and we want you to be aware of where we did have the audit adjustments that were necessary. There are design controls that are in place, but they don't always work the way that they should, and these are the cases where they didn't work where they should have.
Everything's being taken care of with that. So.
And I just want to add too that sometimes the grant award, it will have a description and it's very broad. And there were printers that went in conjunction with some, I think there were laptops, correct?
Yes.
And since it was a piece to help this item, this equipment function, the assumption was made that it would be allowable. And ultimately it wasn't.
Well, just to make sure that this report with the internal controls, maybe later on or so, you can tell us how you're doing to correct all of that. And Dr. Felix, maybe once again, with the mayor's consent, when we have our June retreat, you can bring him back to give us more in depth to see where we stand on and what we've done to correct all of these things.
Yeah, absolutely.
I still have another question. Are you finished?
I've got one more report to go through, but
go
if you've got a question, go for it.
Is it on the book, the big book?
I'm just going to briefly go over it, yeah.
Go over it.
Yep. Okay, so this is the annual financial report then. And this is the crux of really what we do, the biggest piece of it. And so our purpose is to give an opinion on the financial statements. We did give a clean opinion on the financial statements. So what that means is that the financial statements are reported in accordance with generally accepted accounting principles. And as part of the audit, the way that we go about doing that is we do it on a risk-based approach. So based on our previous experience, based on our understanding of internal controls, we'll design our procedures. And so some of the control issues that were identified, what that does is that obviously raises a level of risk that there could be a misstatement. And so those are areas within our work where we'll focus a lot of our attention on, because if there is a control issue, then we'll do additional procedures in order to ensure that the balances are reported properly. So that's where major focus is on some of those higher risk areas, but it doesn't mean we don't test all areas. Any significant areas, and when I say significant, we use a dollar threshold, but we also use common sense too. There's certain things that we know that either investors or the public are going to be interested in. So it's not always just about the dollar amount. And so we'll design our procedures to perform tests on those areas as well. We'll also do rotation of audit procedures as well as surprise procedures, because you don't want management to get used to just these are the areas that we look at every single year. So we always change that up, and we're always looking at something different each year as well. So a couple of things that I just wanted to point out in the financial statements. One is your other post-employment benefits, and and the reason I wanted to point it out is the liability that's reported on the financial statements is about $18.6 million. But I wanted to bring that up because for fiscal year ended June 30, 2018, there's a new governmental accounting standards statement that's going to be implemented. So that liability is actually going to increase when that gets implemented. Right now, that $18.5 million is recognizing your future liability over the service life of employees. So you're recognizing that liability for employees that are currently working here, but not to the full amount. Basically the way the actuary does it is estimates, at what point will they retire, and so by the time they retire, you would accrue that entire liability. The new GASB statement is basically saying, okay, we know what our future liability is for everything out there. That's what's going to get recorded on the financial statements. So based on the most recent actuary that was done, that liability is probably going to go up anywhere between $1 million and $2 million. So you can expect to see that OPEB liability go up quite a bit. One of the things that is factoring into that. And I know, you know, council in the past had changed how the OPEB was being funded and individuals participating. Right now, there are two pieces that are going into calculating that that liability. One is the actuarial accrued liability for those employees, you know, that you're paying for. That when they retire, you're going to pay, you know, up until they hit Social Security age. But then for those employees that, you know, at Social Security age, if they choose to stay on the city's plan, they're going to pay for it themselves, but they're still on the city's plan, and so they call it an implicit rate subsidy then, because what that's saying is okay, even though they're paying their own rate, they're causing your premiums, the city premiums, to go up. And so that's being factored in there as well. What some cities have done is they've actually separated those pools so that you've got the retired employees who are paying their own rate, and then you've got a separate city pool. And that would actually lower that liability, because now you're not mixing, you know, retired older employees with younger current employees and increasing that implicit rate basically. So I just wanted to point that out. I'm sorry.
Can we do that? Can we separate those into two pools so our liability can go down?
We could, because I know that the trust does report separately for the retirees and the current employees.
Well, if you can look at it, because I know the school district, they are separate. The retirees are separate from the regular employees.
Right.
But if it'll help us with our liability, especially if we decide to bond ourselves or whatever, we got to keep that liability low. It's just something to look at. Go ahead.
A couple other things. So within your Arizona State retirement and your public safety, there are also OPEB liabilities in there as well. So you're going to see that liability go up for those as well, because right now there is no liability being reported related to the OPEB public safety or the Arizona State retirement, and so those are going to get added in there as well. I don't have the dollar amount for those. The state retirement one, the Arizona State retirement one, that's a cost sharing pool, so that's just sort of wait and see when the report comes out. The public safety hasn't updated the actuarials yet to reflect that, so once it is, we'll have a better idea of what that liability will be as well. But the pension liability themselves, the Arizona State retirement, I believe, is about $11 to $12 million of liability for pensions, versus your public safety is over $26 million that you have as a pension liability. There's a couple things with that. Arizona State retirement is a cost-sharing plan, so no matter what you contribute to the plan, it's really not going to change your rate. It's just, or change your liability, because it's a cost-sharing plan. Everybody would share that. So if you pay extra into it, you're basically paying everybody's extra. Versus the public safety is an agent multiple plan. That's your own plan. So, you know, as you look into the future, and if you're looking to try and reduce that liability, you can actually pay down that. So you can make additional contributions in the future that would directly reduce that liability. So just something to consider. And then a couple of other things I just wanted to point out. If you look at page 15 of those financial statements, and then the other page I wanted you to just take a quick look at is page 22 and 23.
Is that the book or
The book, I'm sorry, yep.
Page 15?
Yep.
Okay, that.
So page 15, these are your governmental funds. And what I wanted to just point out was the fund balances within those funds. And the reason I want to point it out is because you'll see there that you've got these different categories: non-spendable, restricted, assigned, unassigned. So your unassigned fund balances, these are basically funds that either council has not committed for a specific project, or management hasn't assigned for a project, or that's restricted by an outside party. So these are funds that are available to the city to use for really any purpose related to the city function. The restricted fund balances, these are restricted by a third party. So they're restricted to a particular use and how they can be used. And then assigned is generally assigned usually by management or by council, and they're usually for specific projects. So you'll a lot of times see them as in debt service or capital projects is where you'll a lot of times see that. The reason I want to point that out is because I just want you to have an understanding of basically the fund balance, what is actually available to the city that's unassigned. It's not for anything specific. The other thing I just wanted to point out is that the city currently does not have a minimum fund balance policy. And one of the things that I think would be a good fiscal management would be for the city to actually adopt a fund balance policy. And it just varies. I mean, it can be as simplistic as some cities and towns say it has to be 100% of current year expenditures, or 110% of current year expenditures, or it can get more complex as well. And a lot of times what cities and towns will have is within that minimum fund balance, if you had some contingency that came up and you had to dip into that reserve, that you have a methodology to pay that back. And that's just good fiscal management, to be able to have some type of fund balance policy in place for those future contingencies that might be out there. So just another thing just to consider. And then the other page I was pointing out to was page 22 and 23. So you'll see something similar for the proprietary funds. Net position is what it's called for proprietary funds, but you've got your net investment and capital assets and your unrestricted. And the reason I want to point this out is you'll see that you've got several funds that have a negative unrestricted fund balance. And so, basically they're operating in the negative because all that fund balance, let's take the sewer fund for example, has a $58 million net investment in capital assets. Well, what that number means is that's your capital assets. So that's basically monies that you use to purchase capital assets. So that fund balance or net position really isn't available to you for operations because ultimately it's going to be, those assets are going to be depreciated, and you're going to have to purchase new assets. And so you can see that you've got a few funds that are in the negative. And if you turn to the next page, 24 and 25, you'll see where that's coming from. So you'll see that, for example, the sewer fund is actually operating within the negative, as well as the water fund. Basically, meaning that what you're charging for services is obviously less than what it costs you to operate those services. So again, just something I wanted to point out for you to be aware of. Obviously, the ways to address that is up to council. There's cost saving measures, there's rate increases, but just something I wanted you to see because as you can see, for example, with the sewer fund, that the current year change in net position was about 2.4 million in the negative. So it's, that net position is decreasing, and the water fund, the same thing as well. So.
What's the difference, just for clarity here?
Yep.
On page 24 on sanitation, where it shows about $500,000 in the black, and page 42 where it says that a deficit net position in the amount of $3.5 million was recorded in the sanitation fund. The deficit fund equity.
Yes. So that fund, the sanitation fund, so let me just, if you go to page 22 and 23.
I'm there.
Okay, if you compare, so, I pointed out that you've got a negative unrestricted in your sewer fund, but overall your net position in your sewer fund is a positive because of all the investments you have in capital assets. The sanitation fund is negative overall. So that fund, even when you account for the capital assets that are in that fund, is in the red.
So then all of the enterprise funds are in the red then, per se?
When you look at it, yes. I mean, if you look at your unrestricted, as far as what's available, the water fund is in the positive. It's got a positive 1.4, but your sanitation and your sewer are in the negative, yes.
And one of the concerns, I want to make sure, did you do anything with our investments?
As far as?
How are we doing with our investments? Are they, conservative so that we're doing it okay, that we don't lose this money that we need?
Yeah, we don't, when we do the audit, we don't give an opinion on what you are investing in. What we'll do is we'll confirm the balances and then report them, based on leveling as far as what risk level that they are. But we don't really go into, because that's more a wealth advisory type of service to be provided as far as how well that you're doing and whether you could do better. But if you do look at page 42 and 43, it gives a breakdown of your investments,
Right.
and they're very conservative when you look at what you're invested in. I mean, you have 21.9 million that's just in cash, and then you've got 1.3, which is in certificates of deposits, which I think most of that is related to the benefit trust. And then U.S. government securities is about $2.7 million. So all of, U.S. government securities are probably one of it's just a money market. So again, probably the most secure that you can get. And I believe that a majority of that is also the employee benefit, the money market. So for the city as a whole, really there aren't any investments. It's pretty much all cash in bank.
We started in July of 2017, and we moved that money to a money market and March.
Which was a very good recommendation you made.
So we will see that this next
Next one. And finally, a highlight here is page 52, the risk management. There's quite a bit of it on 51 and 52. There's risk management, which is basically the lawsuits that are pending, and some of these are dealing in the millions of dollars. And one of them has to do, I guess, when you say wastewater treatment plant, I guess that has to do with the IOI. Is that what that? IBWC with the IOI, yeah. But is there anything out here that you see that you can highlight for me? Is this, when you do these things, this is customary to see all of these millions of dollars that are potential liabilities for us? Or?
It is, yeah, and just because it's reported here, it doesn't mean that this is something that's going to be paid out. The important thing is that they're disclosed so that the user to the financial statements understand what some of those contingencies are, so that when an investor is looking at the financial statements, they know what some of the things are that are out there. It's honestly not uncommon to have disclosures within cities. I mean, cities are deep pockets for people to sue, and so there are always lawsuits that are out there. So it's not uncommon.
And when you come back, Dr. Felix, can we, on this risk management, there's a paragraph here, and I just want to get a little bit more detail, but not right now, on our retreat, on our self-insurance. It seems like there's a concern with risk management with our self-insurance, and if we could give us a little bit more detail on that in June when we go out. I just want to make sure we're doing this okay, because the way you pointed out here, I don't want to get into trouble. Okay?
Right.
So you point this out, but I don't want you to point it out and then we file it away. You point it out and we need to do something, we should do something.
Yeah, so there's two things here. I don't want you to confuse the risk management footnote with the contingency footnote. Those are two separate items.
Yeah, no, I'm looking at risk management A, and B is the contingency, which is the lawsuits.
Right,
okay,
right.
I got it.
So the risk management one, this is for your employee benefit trust.
Right.
So this is more for like health claims. So that's that note, and then the contingencies, yeah, that's separate. So
I just want to make sure we're okay. How's that fund doing, and a little detail on that.
Okay.
Mayor, I think I'll wait until Dr. Felix has had a time, and then we can talk in detail at our retreat. Thank you.
Yeah. Any other questions? All right. Well, again, thank you for having me here today. I really appreciate all of the finance staff and Jeanette for all of their assistance in helping us get the audit wrapped up and for getting things pulled together for us. So appreciate all of their work. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much for that report and review. I think we'll go back to presentations 8, and that'll be a presentation of the City Hall Annex status Chase Bank building.
Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. Before you should have the layout of what the architects came up with for the Chase building, what they proposed, how they would situate the cubicles and everything. But this was prior to relocating the court from here to the courthouse. I think, and from what I understand, the idea now is to also put court in this building. So I don't know how much credibility this proposed sketch has now.
Just, we can get a report on this, Mayor, when they finalize that, because I know that was a change, so let's just wait until.
So I think that new plans would have to be
It would be
created.
helpful when you have the new plans, because I know that was a last minute thing, so we don't want to put you on the spotter.
Okay, so I guess we'll continue with B. Presentation, City of Nogales 2018 Home Rule Election Schedule.
So before you also have the presentation for home rule. And just a brief description of what home rule is. Like Dennis mentioned, it is something that is imposed by the state. It's part of the Constitution, and it's a formula-based budget spending limit on Arizona cities and towns. Home rule is what is considered an extension of that limitation, where the town is or the city is allowed to spend more than what the state is saying is allowable. So just again, some more information on home rule, state imposed. It's decades old. The formula to calculate the limitations is based on population and then like an inflation index. And if you look at, let me just go really quick. Just so you can, and I know it's kind of hard to read, but you should have that in your packet. If you look at the calculation, they go back to 1978 and use that population number, and they divide it by they take the population from now and divide it by the population back in 1978 to get a population factor. And then they also provide what we would have spent back in that time, and we multiply it out, and it will show you what you would be limited to if home rule were not to pass. So if we were not to pass home rule, we would be limited to $38 million a year versus the 55 million that we usually spend.
Now, can you give us the idea of that would happen and how it would affect our budget?
It would
Do we
reduce
have to
our
make
budget.
cuts, or-
It would reduce our budget by about 47%. And the items that would be affected, let me have Rob's here today. Just, F5? Thank you. So the services that would be impacted if home rule were not to pass are your police, fire, building inspections, street paving, maintenance, your parks, libraries, recreation, water, sewer, and sanitation services. Those would all be reduced significantly. If you look at the spreadsheet here, there are some exclusions that we are allowed to take that would not be included in the total limitation, and those are your HERF and overweight fees, your principal and interest payments, and any grant funds, and the Nogales Housing Authority. Those are all excluded when calculating the amounts. So this is the schedule that we would have to adopt for home rule. First of all, just to calculate the impacts, and then from there we have to publish twice during the month that we will be having public hearings. The public hearings would be held in April and May at the council meetings prior to the council meeting. And then from there at the May 1st meeting, we would adopt, the Mayor and Council would adopt the order or approve the order to go forward with home rule. From there, we would submit all our documentation to the Auditor General so that they can review and kind of give us their blessing that everything looks okay. From there, we would prepare the pamphlet that would be mailed out to all the registered voters. And then also, I didn't put in the calendar, but we would also do outreach. We can't spend any money on this, but we can reach out to the schools and the communities and kind of just inform them of what home rule is. And of course, we can't persuade them to either vote yes or no. It's just meetings to give them information, any questions that they might have. And then it would be put on the ballot, and then we would vote on it on the primary.
But the difference between the 38, Mayor, may I? Thank you. The point here is that if the vote fails, we're limited to $38 million in comparison to the $54 million. That doesn't mean that there's going to be a tax that we're going to impose.
No.
You see, the money is still going to be there.
Yes.
It'll still be in the bank. We just can't spend that money.
That's correct.
And that's something that we need to tell the people, because sometimes the people think, well, this is another tax that's coming up. And it's not a tax. It's just an expenditure that we can do. And the money we still have to provide the service. The money is there. We're not imposing any kind of fee or tax, additional burden, property, nothing like that. The money's there. We're just asking them for permission to spend beyond the expenditure limitation that is imposed by the state of Arizona.
That's correct. And if you look at our flyer, you will see there that a yes vote would continue existing level of city services, local budgetary control, versus we control the budget, not the state, and then not a tax increase. And that number is a little bit low. It has to change. It should be 47% by what I calculated earlier today. And again, it would impact the services that are provided by the general fund, which are library, police, fire, recreation, and then our water, sewer, and sanitation services.
And a 30% cut to our budget would be hard to recoup.
Yes.
Extremely. I hope you plan to go out to all those civic organizations and explain that to them. I think Mr. Dilly did that. He went to all the service organizations 2 or 3 times to make sure they all understood. Because it helps with the marketing.
And of course, we would like to probably do that in April and May before classes end. We're still able to reach out to parents.
Sure. You can go to their parent-teacher meetings.
So, does anyone have any other questions?
No, we have to do it.
Is it every 4 years?
Every 4 years. So the last time it was on the ballot was in 2014.
How did it pass? It passed by, what was the vote?
I don't remember.
Yeah, it passed by quite a bit. But again, the one in Tucson didn't pass, so we got to be sure that everybody understands what we mean.
Yes, and actually, that was a comment that was made here. So yeah, Tucson Home Rule did not pass, resulting in significant service impacts across the organization. And if it did not pass, we'd have to wait 2 years to be able to put it out on the ballot again.
Did Tucson put it back on the ballot again?
I don't know.
So that would be, it would hurt quite a bit.
It would significantly.
After they out a lot of people?
Yeah. That services.
Well, we're in favor of it.
Okay, we'll move forward with
We have to do it.
following the guidelines.
This Prop 404 is very much runs parallel with our strategic plan, right, Dr. Felix? I mean, there's no sense in having a strategic plan if we're going to lose 30% of our funding.
And again, it would be more like 47%.
That's even worse.
Because those funds, general funds, sewer, water, and sanitation are about 36.8 million. That's our current budget. And if home rule were not to pass, we would be looking at 19.5 million.
Thank you.
Yes. Thank you, Jack.
The next one.
Kind of a unpleasant reminder, but that's reality, and
Yeah.
we have to make sure we get the word out.
That's right. Hurt tremendously.
Okay.
Yes.
A little bit more of me and then I'm done. So the next two items was budget forecast and then synopsis. So I just took the synopsis as a calendar of what we're looking at for the budget. So currently our intention is to provide the proposed tentative budget to Dr. Felix on March 20th. Give him some time to review and any changes or recommendations that he might have. And then we'll distribute it to Mayor and Council at the April 6th meeting. And then the following week, we would schedule any one-on-ones with any departments that you'd be interested meeting with. And then we would go from there and actually have a study session on April 18th. And we kind of like do a few years ago, we put tables out and it was kind of like a round table kind of discussion that worked really well. And then based on any changes or recommendations made by Mayor and Council, we would put the tentative budget on the council agenda for May 2nd. And if approved, then the next step would be to publish the tentative budget twice in the month of May, and then present the final budget at the first council meeting in the first Wednesday of June. And if approved, then we just distribute the book in July. And just really quick, if you look here, this is what we're currently looking at. All the funds are balanced except for general fund. Right now we have a shortfall of a little over $1 million. And the biggest ticket item is public safety retirement. And that is mentioned right now. We're getting hit really hard with those costs. Things that are not included in the budget right now is the health insurance increase. At the last EBT meeting, the 6.6% increase was suggested, but they will revisit that at the next meeting and probably finalize that. We don't have state shared numbers yet, but probably we're looking maybe $200,000-300,000 increase if we're lucky. And then we still need to factor in if the commercial insurance is going to increase, our liability and risk and all that. And then also any requests from departments like adding additional staff or any capital projects that they're looking at.
And the general fund projected deficiency, is that because of the lower sales tax?
No, the increased cost in retirement. The retirement is almost $600,000, and then we didn't have uniform allowance budgeted last year, and this year we will include that, so that's almost $200,000.
Can it, will that improve with a drop, you know, the they used to have the PD environment, that program that they had, and I guess as it fades out, will that be less going towards a retirement fund?
When they start phasing out when they retire?
Right, as that program, the drop program is faded out.
It will help, but we still have a lot of public safety employees that were hired prior.
How long will it take before you start seeing
It'd be a while.
Still a while. But it starts to alleviate the long range.
It will eventually. Because now public safety employees that are hired are not under these high percentages. They're much lower, and the match is much lower. But right now we're still, probably 99% of our public safety employees are in the, prior to the 2011, so we're seeing police is 50% for next year, Francisco? 50, and fire is 54? So that means that 54% of their salary is is going to be contributed to their pension on behalf of the city. And that includes overtime and everything.
Just a question, why is water there, usually water runs in the positive, you've got it running exactly as the revenue and the expenses being equal.
That means that the budget is balanced. There probably are some excess funds from the, between what's going to be collected and what's going to be spent that could be used for capital projects. But right now, all of the funds are balanced as far as revenues and expenditures, except for general fund.
Just a question, because I have mixed feelings on the question, but if we decide that on the portion of the general fund that we're going to be under, is there a possibility, because there's some, I know there's some projects, especially in the fire department, that we can go into our investment and get some money from there to cover this money over here?
And so, like Dennis suggested, with our fund balance, that we could assign some of that to support some of these projects. But this deficit is all related to operating.
Right. But the question, your answer to my question is yes, we can do that for projects like, let's say, a fire truck. We need a fire truck, and we dip into that, okay, to pay for the fire truck.
Right. And we could also develop a plan where we pay it back in the future.
Oh.
Doesn't any money like that have to go into the general fund, and then from the general fund, or if there's a shortage in the sewer, is the water department lend the money to the sewer, and we carry it like a loan, or?
That's what we used to do in the past, but right now they are all
They're balanced.
Yes.
But in the past, that's what's done.
Yes, general fund would have to subsidize.
But any interest income would go to the general fund.
For the most
It
part.
can't go directly into an enterprise fund.
It is, when we allocate interest right now, every month, we are allocating some of it to water because they did have some cash available because of the amount that we transferred over. So we took a percentage, and some of it is going to general fund and some is going to water.
But because that was water money.
Yes.
That was general
Right.
and the enterprise fund money.
Yes.
Right.
But the other two funds didn't have any cash.
Right, no.
Well, Dr. Felix, when we start working on the budget and we meet with you as a council, could you come back with some recommendations on how we can purchase a fire truck and maybe 2 or 3 police cars that we haven't done according to the chief in 5 years or so, and see how we could pay for that, and or pay back later on or something? Could you come back with something like that? I just don't want people to see the $1.1 million and say that we're stifled, because there's some suggestions here, some creative things that we can do as a council.
Right.
You know, sometimes I have mixed feelings because I don't want to get into the, I don't want to take from Peter to pay Paul though either. But if we have something and say we're going to pay back to Peter, then that's even better. So if you could come back, I think you'll have time to come back with some solid recommendations, so we can do that, and maybe later in 2 or 3 years when we pay that back, we can get another ambulance, another fire truck, have something so that we know long-term planning is a part of our strategic plan. Thank you.
Does anyone have any other questions?
No, I just think you're going to need more than one day for us to meet with everybody, and if you can tell us ahead of time, so we can put it down on our calendar, so it's not doesn't break up into anybody's commitment or anything like that.
Maybe do 2 Wednesdays?
Well, that's fine, as long, if we start at 4:30, and we can go 2-3 hours each day, and we can do it, right? We can move quickly. It's your leadership, Dr. Felix, that gets us through right away, and how you have everything organized and prepared.
We'll do that.
Thank you.
Okay, we'll get it. Thank you. Thank you for it. Okay.
I guess it's a, we're done with the home rule, and do we have we have some more stuff here, I guess, for your department, right?
No, I did the item B and C.
Okay, how about C, was that, that's the one that's coming up? Oh,
That's what we just did.
oh, that's the one, okay. So that's why the 2008 up to 290 forecast, and I guess that pretty much covers the budget, right? So, that's it? Until we get together again.
Well, we're finished, we just need that Calle Sonora. That's it?
That's it, all right. It looks like we're on
schedule.
kind of schedule here, so.
I don't think that clock's right.
No?
Probably slow 5 minutes.
But I just put a new battery in it, but there's something wrong.
Well, it's 5:40, Mayor, we're still okay.
Oh, there
We're
you go,
still
10
okay.
minutes, all right, plenty of time. Enough to get a break. Okay, so we'll go to C, discussion items. Number A, letter A, Calle Sonora Bridge Road lighting. And I guess we got our engineer over here. Give us an update and maybe even the study that was last presented. Thank you.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. Thank you for this opportunity to present an update of this project. It's one of my favorite projects because it's a big issue with the traffic congestion there. Let me go through this presentation. Okay, this is exactly what you have in your hands. Last July, you decided to move forward with the design phase. In September, after a couple of reviews from legal, we obtained the preliminary approval of the statement of qualifications. November, we had the first publication in the local newspaper and in Tucson as well, and on our website. And then we repeated the publication in December. We made, let's say, some mistakes in the first publication, so we corrected with an amended statement of qualification in the next month. So, and the mistake was that we requested mandatory meetings to all the consultants, but only a few consultants show up. So we wanted to see more consultants, and then everybody can submit their statement of qualification even if they didn't attend the pre-submittal meeting. So we advertise again, and we receive this time, like maybe the pre-submittal meeting, we had about 10 engineering firms interested. So we expanded the selection of engineering firms by advertising a second time. And then in January, we applied for, let me go back. In November, we submitted an application to the Arizona Department of State, Arizona Department of Transportation. They are the ones who administrate the CMAQ grant for congestion mitigation. So we, in January, we obtained a conditional approval from ADATS stating that if funding available in year 2020, we'll receive $1.5 million for the bridge improvement in that location. So that is every 5 years, ADA program $2.7 million more or less for the Santa Cruz County and the city of Nogales. From the 2.6 million, we are obtaining 1.5 in the next 5 years, which is, and then in addition to that, we also submitted an application to construct this a different project, multi-use pathway along Grand Avenue from Banker to all the way up to the city limits along Grand Avenue on one of the shoulders. The multi-use pathway also will have a lateral multi-use pathway from Friendly Road all the way to the high school. That is still in the planning process, but ADA already approved that project to happen in 2019. So the funding for the design and construction will be released in 2019. Then in a similar subject, we also will receive another funding for paving Banker, similar funding, CMAQ funds. We'll start with the design phase in the next few months, and then also we'll start with the construction maybe by the end of this year or early next year. So again, part of the same CMAQ funding, but again, we are receiving most of the money from CMAQ funds will be provided to the city.
Can I ask you something, Ingeniero? On that Banker, are you talking about the back part of Banker?
Exactly. Yes, we're north of Doe Street,
Okay.
all the way up. That is a city road, but it's not paved. Yeah, it's like a cul-de-sac. It's the dead end road. So this kind of project, this kind of funding is for mitigation of dust. So everything that is unpaved qualifies, or any kind of traffic congestion that generates smoke and contaminates the air, so qualifies. That's why Calle Sonora, because it creates a traffic congestion there, we submitted an application to expedite the traffic movement there. So that's why it's a qualified project. Following with so in January this year, we received the statement of qualifications. In February, we met with Union Pacific. We went to speak with Union Pacific about this project and the proposed widening of Calle Sonora that would impact their facility. Just with the idea of starting a conversation with them and tell them about our project, and obviously in the future we'll approach them to request some kind of funding assistance as well, if they want to come to the table.
What was their attitude when you approached them? Were they very receptive?
They were very receptive in terms of, they were not decision makers, obviously. They were just Union Pacific representative from low levels, but they stated that Union Pacific has participated in construction projects before for the improvement of intersections, but they prefer overpasses than at grade level. So they don't want liabilities. They can invest in a bridge, but because they will eliminate at grade crossings.
Make a bridge.
Yeah. So it might be that at the time that if we request public funding, they will say, well, we don't want to fund it at grade level. So, but anyway, we'll try it. We are in the process of reviewing the statement of qualifications. We form a selection committee for consisted of 5 members. One of them is the Santa Cruz County Public Works Director, Jesus Valdez. Another member is J.B. Manson from Pacific Brokerage, which is right there in the corner. Another member is a person here present, Scott. Yeah, so he's part of the Fresh Pros Association. Mr. Alejandro Bárcenas, Public Works Director, and myself. So we are reviewing the statement of qualifications. Actually are very good, all of them. I think all of them qualifies, but we have to take a look very closely in in the criteria that we are using. So the plan is to select a consultant, and then once we define or select the most qualified firm, we'll start contract negotiations with them, define very well the scope of work, and request a quote from them. At this level, we should not pick the consultant based on what they charge. It's just based on the experience and what they have done in the past with similar projects. And then once we start the negotiation with the most qualified engineering firm, we'll bring it to you with our recommendations. And then maybe in May we'll be able to put in front of you for approval the contract for the design phase.
Right.
Yep.
Yes,
Mayor, if you look through this, Dr. Felix, and through our agenda, it's a breath of fresh air. How you're working, everybody here, going out for grants and being successful with it. I mean, your presentation is wonderful, absolutely wonderful. It's just, I haven't felt this good in a long time about sitting on the city council. And I just want you to know this is wonderful. What I see through the agenda, especially from the fire department, how they're going out. I don't care if the grant is for $5,000 or $50,000, but they're going out and seeking outside funds to get their equipment, to do this, to enhance the quality of life. And Dr. Felix, this is wonderful, absolutely wonderful. I hope you keep this up. This positive working environment that I see here is wonderful. That's Mayor, this is going to make our neighborhoods a lot better.
and even if we're not getting the retail and everything else, we can make it because we get all these special projects.
That's right. It's a
From
big
outside,
help.
outside funding due to Dr. Felix.
Very positive. Very positive. Thank you, Doctor. Thank you.
Thank you.
It's wonderful.
Any more questions?
No. That's enough.
No, I think what we need now is a motion and just adjourn.
Adjourn.
Okay. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. This study session is adjourned and until the next regular session. This paperwork out of the way. Ready for a little bit? Yeah.
Good to see you.
Nice to see you. Everything good?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, good. Good to know you. Doctor, how you doing?
Hi, Newbart. Good to see you, sir. Good to see you. Hi, how are you? Good yourself? Good to see you.
How are you, man? How's it going?